The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched higher than most buildings and wider than entire city blocks. Thousands of beings from hundreds of different worlds filled the massive space, their voices creating a constant buzz of alien languages that echoed off the crystal walls. Today felt different, though, the air thick with tension that even the most peaceful species could sense. Admiral Jake Morrison sat in the defendant chair at the center of it all, his blue military uniform crisp and clean despite the 3 years of legal battles that had brought him here. Behind him sat 57 other humans, each representing different parts of Earth's government, military, and colonies scattered across the galaxy. Ambassador Lisa Carter adjusted her black suit jacket and kept her face calm, though inside she knew this day would change everything. The council speaker, a being called Veltar who looked like a walking crystal tower twice the height of any human, raised one of its many arms to bring silence to the hall. The creature's voice came from somewhere deep inside its body and filled every corner of the massive room without any technology to help it carry. We have spent 3 standard galactic years examining the evidence against the species known as humanity, Veltar announced, its words causing a complete silence to fall over the assembled crowd. The charges are serious and the evidence is clear. Humanity stands accused of dangerous military expansion, refusing to share advanced technology with Council oversight, and developing weapons systems that threaten the balance of power in our galaxy. Jake Morrison kept his hands folded in his lap and his eyes focused straight ahead. He had heard these same accusations hundreds of times over the past 3 years. The other humans behind him showed the same calm patience they had displayed throughout the entire trial process. Veltar continued reading from a device that floated near its head. The Council finds that humanity has created artificial intelligence systems that surpass the intelligence of most organic life forms without proper safeguards or Council approval. They have developed weapons capable of destroying planets and shields that can protect entire star systems. Most concerning, they have repeatedly refused to submit these technologies for Council review and regulation. A low murmur went through the alien crowd, but the humans remained silent. Dr. Ben Harris, the chief scientist in the human delegation, simply adjusted his glasses and continued listening. Carol Stone, the military advisor, kept her scarred hands, still on her knees and her expression neutral. Furthermore, the speaker went on, humanity has established colonies and military bases throughout Council space without following proper expansion protocols. They have made first contact with 17 different species without Council supervision. Their trading practices have disrupted established economic relationships between member species. The list of charges seemed endless, but Jake Morrison had heard them all before. What bothered him was not the accusations themselves, but the fact that many of them were simply descriptions of normal human activities that other species apparently found threatening. Humans explored space because that was what humans did. They built things and improved technology because that was how their minds worked. They helped other species because they thought it was the right thing to do. The evidence shows, Veltar continued, that humanity poses a significant threat to the stability and security of our galactic community. Their rapid technological advancement and aggressive expansion cannot be allowed to continue unchecked. Jake Morrison glanced back at Ambassador Carter, who gave him a small nod. They had expected this outcome for months now. The writing had been on the wall since the 2nd year of the trial, when it became clear that the Council was more interested in controlling human development than understanding it. Therefore, the speaker announced, the Galactic Council hereby finds humanity guilty of all charges. As punishment for these crimes against galactic peace, all human colonies outside the Sol system must be surrendered to Council oversight within 1 standard galactic year. All human military vessels larger than patrol craft must be decommissioned under Council supervision. All advanced human technologies must be submitted for Council review and regulation before any further development can proceed. The hall erupted. in noise as thousands of alien voices expressed approval, shock, concern, or anger depending on their species and political affiliations. Through it all, the humans sat in complete silence. Veltar raised its arms again for quiet. Additionally, humanity will be restricted to their home system until they can prove their commitment to galactic peace and their willingness to operate under Council guidance. This restriction will remain in place for a minimum of 50 standard galactic years. Jake Morrison stood up slowly, his movement causing the entire hall to fall silent again. Every eye, antenna, sensor, and other detection organ focused on him as he straightened his uniform jacket and turned to face his delegation. Without saying a word, he nodded toward the exit doors. One by one, the humans began standing up from their seats. Ambassador Carter gathered her papers and placed them in her briefcase. Dr. Harris closed his datapad and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Carol Stone adjusted her metal ribbons and smoothed down her uniform. None of them spoke, but their movements were coordinated and deliberate. The alien observers watched in growing confusion as the entire human delegation began walking toward the exit doors in perfect formation. They had expected protests, angry, speeches, demands for appeals, or at least some kind of emotional response to the verdict. Ambassador Carter paused at the massive doors that led out of the council chamber. She turned back to face the thousands of assembled beings, her voice clear and calm when she spoke. "We understand your position completely," she said, her words carrying easily through the silent hall. "We respect the Council's right to make this decision. We will be withdrawing from all Council space immediately. We wish you good luck with your future endeavors." The heavy doors closed behind the humans with a soft sound that seemed louder than any explosion in the stunned silence they left behind. In 60 seconds, humanity had accepted the harshest punishment in Council history and walked away without a single word of protest or anger. Veltar stood motionless at the front of the hall, its crystalline body reflecting the lights in patterns. That suggested confusion. Around the chamber, thousands of beings sat in complete silence, not understanding what they had just witnessed. The humans were gone, and somehow that felt more ominous than any threat they could have made. The first sign that something unusual was happening came from the orbital monitoring stations around New Terra, humanity's largest agricultural colony outside the Sol system. Captain Steve Johnson received the evacuation orders exactly 4 hours after the Council verdict was announced, and within 6 hours, every human on the planet was packing their belongings. The speed shocked everyone, including the alien residents who had lived alongside humans for decades. The Zephyrians who worked in the grain processing facilities watched in amazement as massive transport ships began landing in perfectly organized sequences. The ships were bigger than anything most species used for civilian transport, clearly designed for exactly this kind of rapid evacuation. Steve Johnson coordinated the evacuation from the Planetary Command Center, his voice calm and professional as he spoke to the hundreds of ship captains, facility managers, and colony administrators scattered across New Terra's 3 continents. The humans moved with an efficiency that seemed almost mechanical, but there was nothing cold about their actions. "All livestock loading will be complete in 18 hours, reported Mary Davis from the main agricultural complex. "We're taking everything, including the breeding stock and genetic samples. The automated feeding systems will keep functioning for the local population, but they'll need to learn how to maintain them." The Zephyrian workers stood in small groups watching as humans loaded cattle, horses, pigs, chickens, and dozens of other Earth animals onto specialized transport ships. Dr. Ben Parker, the colony's head veterinarian, spent hours teaching the local Zephyrians how to care for the animals that would be staying behind. "These are good animals," he explained to Zephina, the Zephyrian who had worked with him for 8 years. "They're adapted to your climate now, and they'll provide food and materials for your people. The automated systems will take care of most of the work, but someone needs to watch for diseases and injuries. Zephina's feathers ruffled in the way that showed confusion. "But why are you leaving them, Ben Parker? These animals are valuable. Your people spent years adapting them to our world." Ben Parker finished adjusting the medical scanner and handed it to his alien colleague. "Because you need them more than we do. We're going home. But this is your home. You should have everything you need to take care of yourselves." The same scene played out across dozens of human colonies and installations throughout Council space. On Kepler Station, the massive industrial complex that supplied rare metals to half the galaxy, Chief Engineer Linda Ross supervised the systematic removal of every piece of human technology. The work took 3 days and required nearly 100 transport ships. But when it was finished, the aliens who remained found themselves with completely functional facilities, power systems, and life support networks. The humans had taken their advanced manufacturing equipment and AI systems, but they had left behind everything necessary for the stations to continue operating. "I don't understand," said Kethlan, the local station manager who had worked with Linda Ross for 12 years. "Why remove the manufacturing systems but leave the power generators?" Linda Ross sealed the last equipment container and marked it for transport. "Because the power generators will keep you alive and comfortable. The manufacturing systems were designed around human engineering principles that would be difficult for other species to maintain safely. You're better off building your own systems that match your technological approaches." On research stations throughout the galaxy, human scientists were having similar conversations with their alien colleagues. Dr. Alex Turner had spent 15 years studying xenobiology alongside researchers from 7 different species. Now he was carefully copying all the human research data onto portable storage devices while explaining which projects could continue without human involvement. "The bacterial culture samples in Lab 7 are completely stable," he told Dr. Vexari, a crystalline researcher who had been his closest collaborator. "Your people understand the growth medium requirements better than we do anyway. The protein synthesis work in Lab 12 should be shut down, though. It requires human neural interface, technology that we can't leave behind." Dr. Vexari's crystal body changed colors in patterns that showed distress. "But Alex Turner, that research could cure the wasting disease that affects my people. Why can't you leave the interface technology?" Alex Turner paused in his packing to look at his colleague. "Because the Council decided that human technology is too dangerous to share freely. We're respecting that decision. But the research data will be available if your people want to develop their own interface technology. The hard part was figuring out which proteins to target. Your people are smart enough to develop the tools to make it work." What disturbed the Council observers most was not what the humans were taking, but how they were taking it. There was no anger, no bitterness, no dramatic speeches about injustice. They packed their belongings with the same careful efficiency they brought to everything else, said goodbye to alien friends and neighbors, and left. Captain Carol Stone oversaw the evacuation of the military installation on Proxima 7, one of the most strategically important bases in Council space. The base had been jointly operated with the Hegemony fleet for 23 years, and many of the alien officers had served alongside humans for their entire careers. "You're really leaving everything?" asked Commander Tixeth, staring at the massive defense installations that would remain behind. "The shield generators, the sensor arrays, the communications equipment?" Carol Stone finished transferring the last of the human personnel files to her datapad. "We're leaving everything that keeps this base functional and defensible. The weapons systems are being removed because they use human targeting technology, but the shields and sensors will work fine with Hegemony equipment. You'll need to recalibrate some things, but the instruction manuals are in the computer system." The Hegemony commander's scales shifted to colors that showed confusion and concern. "But without the human weapons systems, this base cannot defend against serious attacks. The entire sector will be vulnerable." Carol Stone looked at her longtime colleague and friend, her expression serious, but not angry. "Then the Council will need to find new ways to defend this sector. We're not abandoning you out of spite, Tixeth. We're following the Council's decision. that human military technology is too dangerous to share. This is what they wanted. Within 3 months, every human colony, research station, mining operation, and military base outside the Sol system was empty of human personnel and human technology. The evacuation was so thorough and well-organized that many observers suspected it had been planned for years. Ambassador Lisa Carter held one final press conference from the human embassy station on the edge of Council space. Reporters from dozens of species attended, expecting dramatic statements about the injustice of the Council's decision. Instead, Carter simply read a brief statement. Humanity is withdrawing from all Council space as directed by the Galactic Council. We thank our alien friends and colleagues for years of cooperation and friendship. We wish everyone success in their future endeavors. Effective immediately, the Sol system will no longer maintain diplomatic relations with the Galactic Council. Any future communications should be directed to our automated systems. The questions came rapidly from the assembled reporters, but Carter simply smiled politely and walked away. The humans had said everything they intended to say, and now they were going home. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. Species that were conquered usually fought back. Species that were restricted usually protested loudly. Species that were punished usually demanded justice or revenge. Humanity simply packed up their belongings, said goodbye to their friends, and left. Somehow, that quiet dignity felt more ominous than any threat they could have made. 3 months after the verdict, the silence from human space was becoming impossible to ignore. Council member Zixth of the hegemony noticed it first during a routine economic briefing, when the trade statistics showed patterns that made no sense, until he realized what was missing. "Where are the rare Earth shipments from the Titan mining operation?" he asked his economic advisor, a thin reptilian creature whose scales turned pale when stressed. "The mining operation was abandoned, Counselor. The humans dismantled everything and took it back to Sol system. We're trying to restart mining operations with our own equipment, but the yield is less than 15% of what the humans were achieving." Zixith pulled up the trade data on his display screen and felt his stomach drop as he looked at the numbers. Humanity had been quietly supplying rare Earth elements to 17 different species, medical equipment to 9 worlds, agricultural supplements to dozens of colonies, and manufactured goods to hundreds of trading partners throughout the galaxy. All of that trade had simply vanished overnight. On the planet Aldora, Counselor Nethaya was dealing with a crisis that was growing worse every day. The primary hospital that served 3 billion people was running out of medical nanobots, the tiny machines that could repair damaged tissue at the cellular level. The local medical technology could keep patients stable, but without the nanobots, complex surgeries and trauma treatment were becoming much more difficult. "How long before the next shipment arrives?" Dr. Clareth asked, his voice tight with stress as he looked at the patients waiting for treatment. "There is no next shipment," Nethaya replied, her feathers drooping with exhaustion. "The humans manufactured 90% of the medical nanobots used in this sector. Our own factories can't produce them because the technology requires manufacturing precision that we don't have." The death rates at hospitals throughout Council space began climbing for the first time in a decade. Not because alien medicine was bad, but because it had become dependent on human technology that was suddenly no longer available. The Velnari Confederation discovered their problem when their asteroid mining operations began shutting down one by one. The entire operation had been running on AI systems designed by human engineers, systems so advanced that they could predict ore locations, coordinate mining operations, and manage logistics across dozens of asteroid fields simultaneously. "Can't we just build our own AI systems?" asked Confederation leader Mollax during an emergency economic meeting. "We've been trying," replied Chief Engineer Paleth, his tentacles writhing with frustration. "But human AI technology is decades ahead of ours. Our systems can handle simple tasks, but they can't process the complex calculations needed for efficient Asteroid mining. Our yields have dropped by 70%, and our costs have increased by 300%. What made the situation worse was that the humans had not sabotaged anything. They had simply taken their technology and left, leaving behind functional but basic systems that other species could understand and maintain. The problem was that galactic civilization had become dependent on human innovations without realizing it. Council Speaker Veltar tried to maintain diplomatic contact with humanity, sending official messages through the normal communication channels. The responses were polite but frustrating. Humanity no longer maintains diplomatic relations with the Galactic Council, came the standard reply from the automated system at the edge of Sol space. If this is a medical emergency, please contact the Red Cross emergency frequency. If this is a navigation emergency, please contact the Emergency Beacon Network. For all other matters, please consult your local authorities. The automated system was courteous and helpful, but it was clearly not interested in political discussions. When Veltar tried to send requests for trade agreements or technology sharing, the responses were always the same polite refusal. Dr. Gary Adams had been managing food distribution networks throughout the galaxy for 15 years, but no one had paid much attention to his work until he was gone. His AI systems had been quietly monitoring crop yields on hundreds of worlds, predicting weather patterns and coordinating surplus distribution to prevent famines. Without his invisible network, 3 minor food shortages quickly developed into serious humanitarian crises. The Kethalani homeworld, which had experienced drought conditions for 2 years, suddenly found itself cut off from the surplus grain that had been keeping its population fed. We need to establish emergency food shipments from the agricultural worlds in the Outer Rim, demanded Kethalani Representative Zureth during a council emergency session. The agricultural worlds are dealing with their own distribution problems, replied Veltar, its crystal body flickering with stress patterns. Without human coordination systems, everyone is having difficulty managing surplus and shortage balancing. The research station on Titan 7 sat empty and unused, its advanced quantum communication arrays dark and silent. Dr. Helen Moore had been leading breakthrough studies in faster-than-light communication, work that had promised to revolutionize how the galaxy stayed connected. Now the alien scientists who remained couldn't even turn on the equipment, let alone understand how it worked. The communication arrays require quantum resonance calibration that only human neural interfaces can provide, explained Dr. Vexari to a council investigative committee. We understand the theory behind the technology, but we can't interact with it directly the way humans can. Several frontier colonies had been depending on those communication experiments to maintain contact with the rest of galactic civilization. Now they were completely cut off, relying on slow traditional communication methods that took weeks or months to carry messages across interstellar distances. The council meetings had changed dramatically over the 3 months since the human exodus. Instead of the usual debates about expansion policies and trade agreements, every session was dominated by crisis management discussions. The hegemony blamed the Confederation for pushing too hard for human punishment. The Confederation blamed the Crystalline Assembly for not understanding human psychology. The Assembly blamed everyone for failing to prepare contingency plans. We need to send a diplomatic mission to Sol System, suggested Assembly Representative Lux Andra during one particularly heated session. Clearly, the humans are willing to maintain some limited contact through their emergency services. Perhaps we can negotiate a gradual restoration of relations. They specifically said they no longer maintain diplomatic relations with the Council, Veltar replied, its voice carrying harmonics that suggested deep frustration. What makes you think they would be willing to negotiate? Because they're rational beings. Luxandra's crystal body pulsed with confident patterns. Once they've had time to consider the consequences of complete isolation, they'll realize that cooperation benefits everyone. But reconnaissance ships sent to the edge of human space reported something that made the council members increasingly uncomfortable. Human space had become completely opaque to outside observation. The normal electromagnetic signatures of a technological civilization were still there, but they were different somehow, organized in ways that didn't match any known patterns. Whatever. The humans were doing behind their borders. They were doing it quietly and efficiently. More troubling, the few human ships that were spotted seemed to be using technology that was more advanced than anything the Council had seen before. Captain Ryan Taylor had been patrolling the dangerous Omega Nebula region for 8 years, leading joint council fleets against pirates and raiders who attacked merchant vessels in the area. His departure had left a critical gap in the region's defenses, and the results were becoming obvious. Raid frequency has increased by 400% in the past 2 months, reported the new patrol commander during a security briefing. Without human sensor technology and tactical coordination, we're unable to predict or prevent most attacks. The pirates had quickly learned that the Council fleets were much less effective without human participation. Raids that would have been impossible when Captain Taylor was coordinating defenses were now succeeding regularly, making several important trade routes too dangerous to use. The silence from human space was becoming louder than any threat they could have made. Every day that passed made it clearer that humanity had not been just participants in galactic civilization. They had been essential infrastructure that everyone had taken for granted, and now that infrastructure was gone, leaving the galaxy to discover just how much they had depended on the quiet competence of the species they had decided to punish. 6 months after the Exodus, the true scope of humanity's integration into galactic civilization was becoming impossible to ignore. It was not just trade goods and technology that had disappeared, it was the humans themselves and their unique ability to solve problems that other species found impossible. The Kethlani Civil War had been brewing for 2 years, a territorial dispute between the northern and southern regions of their homeworld that was complicated by ancient cultural differences and modern resource competition. Captain Susan Wells had been mediating the negotiations, using her understanding of both human psychology and Kethlani culture to find solutions that both sides could accept. Without her patient guidance, the diplomatic talks had collapsed within 3 weeks of the human departure. The northern Kethlani claimed the southerners were hoarding water resources during the ongoing drought. The southern Kethlani accused the northerners of trying to steal their ancestral territories. What had been angry words became violent actions, and what had been a political dispute became an armed conflict. The situation has escalated beyond our ability to contain, reported Kethlani peacekeeper Morith to the Council Emergency Committee. Neither side will accept mediation from Council representatives. They claim that only Captain Wells understood their cultural concerns well enough to propose fair solutions. The war was spreading beyond the Kethlani homeworld as neighboring systems chose sides or tried to protect their own interests. 3 different species had become involved in what should have been a local dispute, and the Council's peacekeeping forces were struggling to prevent the conflict from destabilizing the entire region. Dr. Linda Ross had been quietly managing the Council's pandemic response team for 7 years, helping develop treatments for diseases that occasionally jumped between different alien species. Her work had prevented 3 major pandemics and contained dozens of smaller outbreaks, but no one had paid much attention to her efforts until she was gone. The plague that struck the Outer Rim started small, just a few cases of respiratory illness, among Zephyrian traders who had visited multiple worlds. Within 2 months, it had spread to 3 different species and was causing serious illness in populations that had no natural immunity to the alien pathogen. We need to develop a broad spectrum treatment that works across multiple species, urged Dr. Vexari during an emergency medical conference. But without Dr. Ross's cross-species medical expertise, we're having trouble understanding how the disease affects different biological systems. The treatments that were finally developed worked, but they came too late for thousands of victims, who might have been saved if the response had been faster and more coordinated. The medical teams from different species had trouble communicating their findings to each other, and there was no one with the broad perspective needed to coordinate an effective response. Engineer Paul Mitchell's fusion reactor designs had been powering the Council's deep space exploration program for 12 years. His compact, efficient power systems had made it possible to send exploration ships to the galaxy's remote regions, opening up new worlds and resources for development. Without human power technology, several long-range exploration missions had to be abandoned when their conventional power systems proved inadequate for extended voyages. The exploration ship Dawn Runner was forced to turn back halfway to its destination when its alien-built reactors could not provide enough power for both life support and the advanced sensor systems needed for planetary surveys. The fusion efficiency. Ratings are barely 60% of what we achieved with human technology, reported Chief Engineer Kalesh to the Exploration Committee. We can maintain basic operations, but we don't have enough power for the sensor sweeps and communication systems needed for effective exploration. 3 promising star systems that might have contained habitable worlds remained unexplored, and 2 colonial expansion projects had to be postponed indefinitely. The galaxy was becoming smaller, as the Council's ability to explore and expand was reduced to pre-human levels. Captain Ryan Taylor's departure from the Omega Nebula Patrol had consequences that reached far beyond increased pirate activity. The pirates themselves were changing their tactics, becoming bolder and more organized as they realized the Council fleets could no longer predict their movements or coordinate effective responses. They're using formation attacks that would have been suicide when Captain Taylor was commanding our forces, reported the new patrol leader during a security briefing. Without human tactical coordination and sensor technology, we can't track multiple raider groups simultaneously or predict their convergence points. The merchant vessels that used the trade routes through the Omega Nebula were demanding better protection, but the Council Navy could not provide it with their current capabilities. Several major shipping companies had stopped using the routes entirely, forcing goods to be shipped through longer, more expensive paths that increased costs for everyone. Dr. Margaret Hayes had been part of the Council's agricultural research program, working to develop crop strains that could grow in the diverse environments found throughout the galaxy. Her hybrid breeding programs had created food plants that could feed dozens of different species while adapting to local soil and climate conditions. With her departure, several worlds that had been developing agricultural independence found themselves struggling with crop failures and reduced yields. The hybrid plants required careful genetic management that the local scientists could not provide, and the backup seed stocks were located in human space where they were no longer available. Our grain yields have dropped by 40% since the hybrid management systems went offline, reported Agricultural Minister Dexoth from the colony world New Prosperity. The local crops can't adapt to our soil conditions as quickly as the human-designed hybrids could. Food prices were rising throughout Council space as agricultural productivity declined and transportation costs increased. What had been minor economic adjustments were becoming serious hardships for the poorer worlds that depended on imported food to support their populations. The research station orbiting the gas giant Helios Prime had been humanity's most ambitious scientific project. In Council space, a massive facility where human and alien scientists worked together to study everything from quantum physics to biological evolution. Dr. Alex Turner had been the coordinator for dozens of joint research projects that were advancing knowledge across multiple scientific disciplines. The alien scientists who remained found themselves unable to continue most of the research programs because they required human insight into complex problems or human technology that could not be replicated. The quantum mechanics laboratory sat unused because its experiments required human neural interfaces. The evolutionary biology program stopped because it depended on human computers that could process vast amounts of genetic data. We understand the individual components of these research programs, explained Dr. Zareth to the Council's Science Committee. But humans had a way of seeing connections between different fields of study that allowed them to approach problems from unexpected angles. Without that perspective, many of our most promising research directions have reached dead ends. The Most disturbing reports came from the Intelligence Division, which monitored activities throughout the galaxy for signs of threats to Council security. Their surveillance systems had been quietly enhanced by human technology and human analysts for years, but the full extent of that enhancement was only becoming clear now that it was gone. Our threat detection capability has been reduced by approximately 70%, reported Intelligence Director Silath during a classified briefing to Council leadership. Human pattern recognition software was identifying potential security risks that our systems missed entirely. Human analysts were interpreting intelligence data in ways that provided early warning of developing problems. Two separatist movements that might have been detected and contained before they became serious threats had now grown into active rebellions. A pirate organization in the fringe territories had developed into what appeared to be a well-funded and well-organized fleet that posed a real threat to Council shipping. Several worlds that had seemed stable and peaceful were showing signs of internal unrest that no one had predicted. The galaxy was becoming a more dangerous and less predictable place as the systems that had quietly maintained peace and prosperity for decades disappeared along with the humans who had built and maintained them. Council meetings were now crisis management sessions that seemed to move from one emergency to the next without ever resolving anything. The leadership was beginning to realize that they had made a fundamental error in understanding humanity's role in galactic civilization. The humans had not been competitors or threats to be controlled. They had been the invisible foundation that had allowed galactic civilization to function smoothly and efficiently. Now that foundation was gone, and everything built on top of it was beginning to crumble. 1 year after the verdict, the Galactic Council faced its worst crisis in centuries. What had started as economic disruption had evolved into a cascading series of disasters that threatened the stability of dozens of worlds and the very foundation of galactic civilization. The Kethalani Civil War had spread far beyond its original boundaries, drawing in 4 neighboring star systems as different species chose sides or tried to protect their own territorial interests. The Hegemony fleet was supporting the northern Kethalani because they controlled the dilithium mines that powered Hegemony ships. The Confederation was backing the southern Kethalani because their agricultural exports fed 3 Confederation worlds that could not produce enough food locally. Casualty reports indicate over 2 million dead across 7 worlds, announced war crimes investigator Thelos during an emergency council session. The conflict shows no signs of resolution, and our peacekeeping forces are insufficient to contain the violence. Without Captain Susan Wells and her unique understanding of interspecies psychology, every attempt at mediation had failed. The alien diplomats assigned to replace her could not bridge the cultural gaps that she had navigated so skillfully. What should have been a local dispute settled through negotiation had become a regional war that consumed more resources every day. The Terminus sector, which had been one of the safest regions in Council space when Captain Ryan Taylor was coordinating, security operations had become a hunting ground for increasingly organized pirate fleets. The raiders had evolved from small groups attacking isolated ships to large formations that could overwhelm Council patrol vessels. They're using coordinated attack patterns that our current tactical systems cannot counter, reported Admiral Vexion during a military briefing. Without human sensor technology and coordination software, we cannot track multiple enemy formations or predict their convergence points in real time. 3 major shipping companies had abandoned the terminus routes entirely, forcing cargo to be rerouted through longer and more expensive paths. The economic impact was spreading throughout Council space as transportation costs increased and delivery times stretched from days to weeks. Dr. Gary Adams had been managing agricultural distribution networks so quietly that most officials had not even known his work existed until it was gone. His AI systems had been monitoring weather patterns, crop yields, and consumption data across hundreds of worlds to prevent food shortages before they became critical. Without this invisible coordination, 3 minor food distribution problems had developed into major humanitarian crises. The drought on Kethlon Prime had been manageable when surplus grain from other worlds could be quickly redirected to compensate for reduced local production. Now, with no central coordination system, the surplus grain sat unused on some worlds while others faced starvation. "We have 17 worlds with food surpluses and 12 worlds with critical shortages," reported Resource Coordinator Melath to the Emergency Aid Committee. "But without human logistics coordination, we cannot efficiently match surplus to need. By the time we arrange transportation, the shortages become famines." The planet Eldora was facing its worst medical crisis in 50 years, as hospitals struggled without the human-manufactured medical equipment that had become essential to modern medicine. Dr. Linda Ross's departure had not just eliminated access to advanced nanobots and surgical equipment, it had removed the expertise needed to train alien medical personnel in emergency response procedures. "Our trauma centers are operating at 19th century efficiency levels," reported Chief Medical Officer Koreth, his voice strained with exhaustion. "We can keep patients alive, but we cannot provide the precision treatment that has become standard practice. Death rates for complex surgeries have increased by 300%. The medical schools that had been training the next generation of doctors found themselves unable to provide education in advanced techniques because the equipment and expertise had been human-designed and human-operated. An entire generation of medical students was graduating with skills that were decades behind what their predecessors had learned. The research station on Titan VII remained dark and silent, its advanced communication arrays unusable without human neural interfaces to calibrate the quantum resonance systems. Dr. Helen Moore's breakthrough work in faster-than-light communication had promised to revolutionize galactic connectivity, but now it represented only what could have been. 7 frontier colonies have been completely cut off from galactic communication networks, reported Communications Director Zaleth. They are relying on automated beacon systems that provide basic navigation data, but no real-time communication capability. The implications went beyond inconvenience, as several of these isolated colonies had been conducting important research or managing critical resource extraction operations. Without real-time communication, coordinating complex operations across interstellar distances had become nearly impossible. The Velnari Confederation was discovering that their entire industrial base had become dependent on human AI systems, in ways that had been invisible until those systems were gone. The asteroid mining operations that provided raw materials for dozens of worlds were operating at less than 30% efficiency with alien-designed automation. "Our mining yield projections for this year are 70% below target," reported Industrial Coordinator Paleth, his tentacles writhing with stress. "Without human AI systems to optimize extraction patterns and coordinate multiple mining operations simultaneously, we cannot maintain the resource flow that supports our manufacturing sector." The cascade effects were spreading as reduced raw material availability forced manufacturing plants to cut production, which reduced the availability of finished goods throughout council space. Prices for everything from clothing to electronics were rising as supply chains that had operated smoothly for decades began breaking down. Council Intelligence Director Silath was dealing with security threats that had been growing in the shadows, while the Council focused on economic problems. 2 separatist movements had evolved into well-armed rebellions that posed serious threats to regional stability. A criminal organization in the Outer Rim had grown powerful enough to challenge Council authority in several star systems. Human intelligence analysis had been identifying these threats months before they became active, Silath reported during a classified briefing. "Our current systems can detect problems after they manifest as violence, but we have lost the predictive capability that allowed us to prevent conflicts before they started." The rebellion on Proxima 7 had begun as a peaceful independence movement that human analysts had identified as potentially dangerous 6 months before it turned violent. With early intervention, it could have been resolved through political negotiation. Now it required military action that was proving both expensive and ineffective. The most troubling reports came from the few reconnaissance missions that had been able to observe activities at the edge of human space. The electromagnetic signatures coming from Sol system and human colonies indicated technological development that was proceeding at an accelerated pace. Human ship designs have evolved significantly beyond anything in our databases, reported Deep Space Reconnaissance Commander Yexoth. The few vessels we've observed at long range appear to be using propulsion and power systems that exceed our current understanding. More disturbing were the reports that human space had become completely self-sufficient in ways that seemed impossible. The massive industrial infrastructure that had supported human colonies throughout the galaxy had somehow been recreated within the Sol system in less than a year. They appear to have developed manufacturing capabilities that far exceed what they possessed when they left Council space, Yexoth continued. Either they had hidden industrial capacity that we never detected, or they have achieved technological breakthroughs that allow for extremely rapid infrastructure development. Council meetings had devolved into shouting matches about who was responsible for the crisis. The hegemony blamed the Confederation for pushing too hard for human punishment. The Confederation blamed the Crystalline Assembly for not understanding human psychology. The Assembly blamed the hegemony for failing to maintain adequate intelligence about human capabilities. We need to acknowledge that we made a serious error in judgment, declared Assembly Representative Lux Andra during one particularly heated session. The evidence suggests that humans were not a threat to galactic stability. They were essential to maintaining galactic stability. It's too late for regrets, replied Hegemony Counselor Zixith, his scales showing patterns of anger and frustration. The question now is whether we can restore some form of relationship with humanity before the entire galactic economy collapses. Council. Speaker Veltar's crystalline body had developed stress fractures that reflected the strain of managing crisis after crisis without adequate resources or expertise. The council that had once governed hundreds of worlds and dozens of species was struggling to maintain basic functions. We must consider the possibility, Veltar announced during a closed leadership meeting, that we cannot solve these problems without human assistance. 18 months after the verdict, Council Speaker Veltar made an unprecedented decision that would have been unthinkable when this crisis began. For the first time in Council history, a formal delegation would travel to Sol system to request a meeting with human leadership. The admission was implicit but clear. The Council needed humanity more than humanity needed the Council. The delegation consisted of representatives from every major species in the Council, led by Veltar itself, and including Admiral Tixith of the Hegemony, Science Coordinator Luxandra of the Assembly, and Intelligence Director Silath. Their ships approached the edge of human space with the careful respect usually reserved for potentially hostile powers. Admiral Jake Morrison was waiting for them at the border, aboard a ship that looked familiar yet completely wrong. It was, clearly based on human design principles that the Council members recognized, but the technology visible on its hull was decades beyond anything they had seen when humanity left Council space. The ship's hull seemed to shimmer with energy patterns that suggested both defensive capabilities and power systems that defied easy analysis. Speaker Veltar, Morrison said, as his image appeared on the delegation's communication screens. Welcome to human space. We understand that you requested a meeting with our leadership. We're always willing to listen to peaceful visitors, though. I should mention that our circumstances have changed somewhat since we last spoke. Veltar's crystalline body flickered with patterns that showed both hope and concern. Admiral Morrison, the Council wishes to discuss the possibility of renewed relations between our peoples. We have come to understand that humanity's departure has created difficulties that we did not anticipate. Morrison's expression remained neutral but not unfriendly. We appreciate your honesty, Speaker. President Andrew Clark has agreed to meet with your delegation. We'll escort you to New Geneva Station, where you can see how we've been spending our time since leaving Council space. The journey to New Geneva Station took 6 hours, during which the Council delegation observed human space with growing amazement and concern. The infrastructure development that had occurred in 18 months seemed impossible, even by human standards. Massive orbital facilities surrounded every planet in the Sol system, connected by transport networks that moved goods, and people at speeds that approached the limits of physics. New Geneva Station itself was a marvel that dwarfed anything in Council space. The facility was clearly designed for both research and manufacturing on a scale that suggested humanity had developed industrial capabilities far beyond what they had possessed when they left the galaxy. The station's energy output alone exceeded the power generation of most inhabited worlds. Dr. Margaret Hayes, humanity's new chief science officer, met the delegation at the station's docking bay. Her presence was both reassuring and troubling, as she looked exactly as the council members remembered her, but the technology surrounding her was clearly years ahead of anything they had seen before. "Welcome to New Geneva Station," Dr. Hayes said, leading the delegation through corridors that hummed with barely contained energy. "We've made some interesting progress since we last worked together. I think you'll find our developments quite remarkable." The tour that followed revealed the scope of humanity's technological leap in ways that left the council delegation speechless. Automated manufacturing systems could build starships in days rather than months, assembling them from raw materials with precision that approached the molecular level. AI networks had evolved into something that seemed to approach genuine consciousness, coordinating complex operations across the entire Sol system with perfect efficiency. "How is this possible?" asked Science Coordinator Lux Andra, her crystal body pulsing with patterns that showed both admiration and fear. "Technological development at this rate should require centuries, not months." Dr. Hayes smiled as she led them past a manufacturing bay where 3 starships were being assembled simultaneously by machines that moved with fluid grace. When we were part of the council, we had to coordinate our research with dozens of different species, each with their own technological approaches and cultural limitations. We had to design everything to be compatible with alien understanding and manufacturing capabilities. She paused at an observation window that looked out over the station's main research complex, where hundreds of experiments were proceeding in parallel. When we returned to Sol system, we were free to pursue research directions that other species might find threatening or incomprehensible. It turns out that human technological development was being artificially constrained by the need to remain compatible with galactic norms. Admiral Tixeth studied the starships visible through the window, his scales shifting to colors that showed deep concern. "These vessels are far more advanced than anything humanity possessed when you left Council space. The power signatures suggest capabilities that could threaten entire fleets." Dr. Hayes nodded calmly. "Our defensive capabilities have improved significantly, yes. We've learned that independence requires the ability to defend that independence effectively. But I think you'll find that our greatest advances have been in areas that benefit everyone." The demonstration that followed showed advances in medical technology that could cure diseases that had plagued alien species for centuries, agricultural techniques that could make barren worlds fertile, and communication systems that could provide real-time connectivity across galactic distances. All of it was based on principles that had been theoretical when humanity left Council space. "You've solved faster-than-light communication," observed Intelligence Director Silath, studying the quantum communication arrays with obvious amazement. "This technology could revolutionize galactic civilization." "We've solved several problems that we'd been working on for decades," Dr. Hayes confirmed. "It turns out that many scientific breakthroughs require approaches that other species find counterintuitive or dangerous. When we were no longer required to limit our research to approaches that everyone could understand and accept, progress accelerated dramatically." The delegation's final meeting was with President Andrew Clark, a career diplomat who had replaced the old council-focused leadership structure when humanity reorganized its government. His office was simple and comfortable, but the view from his windows showed a sol system that had been transformed into something that resembled a single vast machine dedicated to human prosperity and security. "President Clark," Veltar began. "Carefully, the Council wishes to discuss the possibility of renewed cooperation between our peoples. We have come to understand that humanity's contributions to galactic civilization were more significant than we realized." Clark listened patiently as the delegation explained the crises that had developed since humanity's departure. The economic disruptions, the medical emergencies, the security threats, and the technological limitations that were preventing other species from solving their own problems. When they finished, he sat quietly for several minutes before responding. "The Council taught us an important lesson about the value of independence," Clark said finally. "For centuries, humanity tried to be good galactic citizens by sharing our technology, our expertise, and our resources with anyone who needed them. We thought that cooperation and mutual assistance were the foundations of a healthy galactic community." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the transformed sol system. "The Council's verdict showed us that our attempts to help were seen as threats by those we were trying to assist. Our technological advances were viewed as dangerous rather than beneficial. Our willingness to solve problems was interpreted as aggressive expansion rather than helpful cooperation." Clark turned, back to face the delegation, his expression serious but not angry. "We're grateful for that education. It taught us that we needed to focus on our own development and our own security before we could effectively help anyone else." Veltar's crystal body flickered with patterns that showed desperation. "But surely you understand that galactic civilization suffers when humanity isolates itself from the rest of the galaxy. Your departure has created problems that affect billions of beings throughout Council space." "I understand completely," Clark replied, "and humanity is willing to help address those problems. But we will never again participate in galactic civilization as junior partners subject to oversight by those who see our capabilities as threats rather than gifts." He activated a holographic display that showed the current state of Council space, with crisis zones marked in red and areas of instability highlighted in yellow. The display was comprehensive and detailed in ways that suggested human intelligence capabilities far beyond what the Council possessed. "We've been monitoring the situation throughout Council space," Clark continued. "We're prepared to provide assistance with the medical crises, the food distribution problems, the security threats, and the technological limitations that are causing so much suffering. But that assistance will be provided as equals entering into mutually beneficial relationships, not as subjects submitting to Council authority." The terms that Clark outlined were simple but revolutionary. Humanity would provide technological assistance, medical aid, security cooperation,